Okay, day 4 of Veganuary vlogs. Today I'm going to talk about macronutrients, protein, carbohydrates, fats, and this is one of the concerns a lot of people have when they're thinking about going vegan or considering a plant-based diet. And certainly one of the questions a lot of vegans get asked is, but where do you get your protein? Well, it turns out protein's in plants as well. And that's where all the meat eaters get their protein from. And so basically, if you're eating an animal, you're just getting secondary protein. All animals get their protein from plants. And when you look at the actual physiological requirement for protein in humans, it's really quite low. And if you're eating too much protein, it puts a huge load on your body, and especially your kidneys. The byproducts of animal protein particularly are quite toxic in the body, and so having to deal with that, especially when you're eating them in excess, is going to cause a huge load on your body and potentially cause disease. So how much protein do we actually need? Well, it's really quite low. So as an experiment, I entered into a sort of calorie counting app and macronutrient app, a sort of day's food diary for me to see if I was eating my protein requirements. And so on that particular day, I was actually fairly high fruit that day. So for breakfast I had mangoes and papaya and dragon fruit with a small sprinkle of dried coconut and about a teaspoon of hemp seeds for breakfast. And for lunch I had 3 Vietnamese rice paper rolls with some mung bean noodle and raw veggies, and a strip of tofu and tempeh, and a small amount of slivered almonds. And then I had a few lychees in the afternoon as a snack, and then for dinner I had a big salad that was lettuce and capsicum and cucumber and mango and about 7 Brazil nuts and a sprinkling of hemp seeds and some mint. So I entered all that into MyFitnessPal, which is a nutrition app, and what do you know? I met my protein requirements easily just by eating plants. And my fat intake was low as well, which is quite important from a health perspective, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. I met almost all of my nutritional targets when you consider micronutrients. Calcium, easy, was done. The only thing that was a little bit low was iron. B12, fine, everything else was fine. So then I asked a few friends what their sort of typical standard day would look like when it comes to eating. And so the kind of foods I got back were things like eggs and toast, or bacon and eggs for breakfast with some tomatoes and mushrooms. Something like a veggie lasagna for lunch, usually a piece of fruit for a snack, morning or afternoon, and dinner would be something like chicken and rice, or beef stroganoff, or a meat-based dish with vegetables. And so I entered that into a nutrition app as well to compare the two, and your protein targets with that type of diet were actually over what you require. So it was between, depending on the dinner that I entered, it was between 30 to 50% greater than what your body actually requires. And the fat target was interesting. So the fat target, depending on the dinner again, was between 2 to 3 times the fat targets that are considered within a healthy range. And the difference in the fats was also quite startling. So obviously the diet that had more animal products had a lot more saturated fat, which is the unhealthy types of fats, and didn't quite meet the balance for the omega-3 to the omega-6s, whereas my diet was perfectly fine for the omega-3, omega-6 ratio. And so it's really quite easy, and it's not something that you need to be concerned about when going vegan. Protein deficiency is extremely rare if you're eating enough calories. as long as you don't have any sort of gut disorders where you have problems breaking your food down, and that has to be quite extreme before you're going to run into a protein deficiency. And as I said, protein comes from plants in the first place. So if you look at the strongest animals in the wild, things like gorillas and rhinoceros, they're plant eaters. They eat plants all day long, and that's where they get their protein. And as I've already pointed out in the previous vlogs, that's how we're actually set up to get our protein too. So it's not something you need to worry about. What you should be more focused on is fueling your body with healthy carbs. That's where you're going to get your energy from. That's where you're going to get your vitality from. That's going to make you feel energized and happy. It's been shown that diets that are more ketogenic can actually cause depression. They cause reduced athletic performance and endurance, and certainly over time they're going to cause disease as well, especially if you're eating high levels of protein and saturated fat. So my suggestion would be worry more about carbs, make sure you're eating your fruit, don't worry so much about protein, and limit your fat intake. And all of those things are much easier on a vegan diet. So go vegan!